Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the year is 1200. There are no streetlights, no glowing screens, no distant hum of traffic. When the sun sinks below the horizon, true darkness floods the land. In the villages, the last threads of smoke rise from cooking fires. In the towns, heavy wooden shutters are pulled closed and bolted. Behind stone castle walls, torches are snuffed, candles are pinched out, and the great halls fall silent. Across all of medieval Europe, from the poorest peasant hut to the highest royal chamber, night arrives with a weight that modern people can barely imagine. And in that darkness, millions of human beings prepared to do something that connects every single one of us across 8 centuries of history. They prepared to sleep, but the way they slept, where they slept, when they slept, and even what they believed about sleep itself was profoundly different from anything we know today. To step into a medieval night is to enter a world ruled by darkness, shaped by fear, softened by faith, and organized around rhythms that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten. This is the story of how medieval people actually slept. To understand sleep in the year 1200, we first have to understand the world that surrounded it. This was the heart of what historians call the High Middle Ages. Across Europe, great cathedrals were rising stone by stone toward the heavens. Kings and lords ruled over a patchwork of territories. Knights trained for war. Monks copied manuscripts by candlelight. And the overwhelming majority of people, perhaps 9 out of every 10, were peasants who worked the land. Life moved to the rhythm of the seasons, the church bells, and above all, the sun. There were no clocks as we know them. Mechanical clocks would not appear in towns for several more decades, and even then they were rare and imprecise. Instead, time was measured by the position of the sun, the ringing of monastery bells, and the natural cycle of light and darkness. When the sun rose, the world woke. When the sun set, the world began to shut down. Artificial light existed, of course, but it was precious and limited. Candles made of tallow, which is rendered animal fat, were smoky, smelly, and gave off a weak, flickering glow. Beeswax candles burned cleaner and brighter, but they were expensive, reserved mostly for churches and the wealthy. For the common people, the cheapest source of light was the rushlight, a dried reed soaked in fat that burned quickly and dimly. Because light was so scarce and so costly, darkness shaped the entire structure of medieval life. You did not stay up reading or working late into the night the way we do. There was simply not enough light to make it worthwhile, and there were very real dangers waiting in the dark. The medieval night was genuinely dangerous, and people knew it. In the countryside, the darkness could hide wolves, which still roamed the forests of Europe in great numbers. It could hide thieves and outlaws who preyed on travelers. A person who broke a leg stumbling in the black of night, far from help, might not survive. In the towns, the danger took a different shape. Cities were crowded mazes of narrow streets and timber-framed houses packed tightly together. Fire was a constant terror. A single overturned candle or an unattended hearth could send an entire neighborhood up in flames while everyone slept. This is why one of the most important rituals of the medieval night was the curfew. The word itself comes from the old French phrase couvre-feu, meaning to cover the fire. When the curfew bell rang in the evening, often around 8 or 9 o'clock, it was a signal for everyone to bank their hearths, smother the coals with ash, extinguish their lights, and retreat indoors. In many towns, gates were locked, and being caught wandering the streets after curfew could mean arrest, suspicion, or worse. The night belonged to no one. It was a void to be survived, not enjoyed. And so, as the curfew bell faded into silence, medieval families turned to the business of going to bed. But here we arrive at one of the most fascinating discoveries about how medieval people actually slept, something that overturns almost everything we assume about a normal night's rest. Medieval people, and indeed people throughout much of pre-industrial history, did not sleep in one long, unbroken stretch the way most of us try to today. Instead, they practiced what historians call segmented sleep or biphasic sleep. They slept in two distinct phases divided by a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. The historian Roger E. Kirch spent years studying old documents, letters, diaries, court records, medical texts, and works of literature, and he uncovered hundreds of references to this pattern. People spoke casually of their first sleep and their second sleep as if these were the most ordinary things in the world, because to them they were. Here is how it worked. Shortly after darkness fell, perhaps 2 hours after dusk, people would lie down for their first sleep. This deep initial slumber lasted for several hours. Then, somewhere around midnight or in the small hours of the morning, they would naturally wake. This waking period was not a problem to be solved. It was not insomnia, it was simply a normal, expected part of the night, and it could last for an hour or more. And what did people do during this quiet interval between their two sleeps? A great deal, as it turns out. Some lay in bed in a peaceful, meditative state, their minds drifting. Many used the time for prayer. Religious manuals of the period even provided special prayers and devotions meant specifically for this nighttime waking. Couples often talked quietly, sharing thoughts in the intimate darkness. Some rose to tend the fire, check on animals, or visit a neighbor. Others used the time for reflection on their dreams, which they had just experienced vividly during the first sleep. Physicians of the age believed this middle-of-the-night waking was the ideal time for conception, and couples were sometimes advised that this was the best moment to try for children, when both partners were rested from their first sleep. Then after this gentle interval, people would settle back down for their second sleep, which carried them through until dawn. This rhythm was so natural, so universal, that it was rarely even explained. It was simply the way the night was shaped. It is worth pausing to consider how radically different this is from our modern experience. Today, if we wake at 3 in the morning, we often panic. We worry that something is wrong, that we will be exhausted tomorrow, that we are suffering from insomnia. We reach for our phones, we toss and turn, we grow anxious. But for a medieval person, waking in the deep of night was as ordinary as the rising of the moon. The pressure to sleep 8 unbroken hours is, in many ways, a recent invention, a product of artificial lighting and the rigid schedules of the industrial age. The medieval body followed an older, more natural pattern, one that some sleep scientists believe may still live within us today. Now let us step inside the actual spaces where medieval people slept, because where you laid your head depended enormously on who you were. Medieval society was steeply divided, and nowhere was that division more visible than in the bedchamber, if you were lucky enough to have one at all. Let us begin at the bottom with the peasant family, since this is how the vast majority of people lived. Imagine a small house in an English or French village around the year 1200. It is built of timber, wattle, and daub, which is woven sticks plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and dung. The roof is thatched with straw or reeds. Inside there is often just a single room, or perhaps two, with an earthen floor of packed dirt. A fire burns in the centre or against one wall, the smoke curling up toward a hole in the roof, because chimneys were still rare luxuries. This single room was kitchen, living space, workshop, and bedroom all at once, and remarkably it was often shared not only by the whole family but by their animals as well. In the colder months, peasants frequently brought their most valuable livestock indoors at night: a pig, a cow, some chickens, or goats. The animals provided warmth, their body heat helping to take the edge off the freezing nights, and they were kept safe from thieves and predators. So picture the scene at bedtime in a peasant home. The family gathers near the dying warmth of the fire. There are no separate bedrooms, no privacy as we understand it. Parents, children, perhaps grandparents, and other relatives all sleep together in close quarters, often in the same bed or on pallets laid out on the floor. The bed of a poor peasant was a humble thing indeed. For the very poorest, it might be nothing more than a heap of straw or dried bracken on the floor, perhaps covered with a rough cloth and whatever blankets or animal skins the family could afford. Straw was the most common bedding material of all. It was cheap, widely available, and could be replaced when it grew dirty or infested. But straw had its drawbacks. It was scratchy, it rotted with damp, and it was a perfect home for vermin. And vermin were an inescapable fact of medieval sleep. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs infested bedding at every level of society. The mattresses of the poor, stuffed with straw or chaff, teemed with biting insects. Even the beds of the wealthy were not immune. People scratched, they itched, they were bitten through the night. There were folk remedies, herbs scattered in the bedding, meant to repel pests, but nothing truly solved the problem. To sleep in 1200 was to share your bed with countless tiny companions. It is one of those uncomfortable truths that the romantic image of the past tends to leave out. Slightly better off than the poorest were the more prosperous peasants, and the growing class of townspeople, craftsmen, and merchants. They might own a proper bed frame, a simple wooden structure with ropes stretched across it to support a mattress. This is, in fact, where some believe the expression "sleep tight" may have roots, in the need to tighten the ropes of a bed so the mattress would not sag, though the true origin of that phrase is debated. On top of the ropes lay a mattress stuffed with straw, or, for the more comfortable, with wool, feathers, or down. A feather bed was a genuine luxury, soft and warm, and it was the kind of possession that might be carefully listed in a will and passed down through generations. These better homes might also boast real blankets of wool, linen sheets, bolsters, and pillows. Bedding was valuable property. A good bed with all its coverings could represent a significant portion of a household's wealth, and it was treated accordingly, maintained, inventoried, and inherited. For ordinary medieval families, a fine bed was often the single most expensive object they owned. Now let us climb the social ladder all the way to the top, into the world of lords, ladies, and kings, where sleep took on an entirely different character. In a great castle or manor house of the year 1200, the centre of life was the Great Hall. This was an enormous room, often with a high ceiling, where the lord conducted his business, held feasts, dispensed justice, and entertained guests. And for much of the household, the Great Hall was also where they slept. After the evening meal, the tables were cleared and broken down, the benches were pushed aside, and the floor became a sleeping space for servants, retainers, soldiers, and various members of the household. They would bed down on pallets and mattresses near the warmth of the great fireplace, wrapped in cloaks and blankets. Dozens of people might sleep together in a single hall, a snoring, shifting mass of humanity arranged according to rank, with the more important members closer to the fire and the lowest sleeping near the draughty doors. The lord and lady, however, increasingly enjoyed something the rest of the household did not, a degree of privacy. By the year 1200, the wealthiest families were beginning to retreat into private chambers, often called the solar, a room set apart from the public space of the hall, usually on an upper floor. Here stood the great bed, and the great bed of a medieval noble was a magnificent thing, a true symbol of wealth and status. These beds were large, heavily built wooden structures, often elaborately carved and sometimes painted or gilded. The mattress was thick and soft, stuffed with the finest feathers and down. Over it were laid linen sheets, woolen blankets, fur coverlets, and richly embroidered quilts. But the most striking feature was the hangings. Heavy curtains of wool, velvet, or silk were suspended from a wooden frame or from the ceiling, surrounding the bed on all sides. These curtains served a vital purpose. They kept out the bitter draughts that whistled through stone castles. They retained the warmth of the sleeper's body. And in a world where even the great chamber might be shared with servants and attendants, they provided a small enclosed island of privacy and intimacy. For these curtained beds were rarely occupied alone in the way we might think. Even a lord and lady of high rank often had attendants sleeping in the same room, a trusted servant or lady-in-waiting resting on a low truckle bed nearby, ready to answer a call in the night. Privacy, even for the powerful, was a relative and limited thing in the medieval world. Let me pause here for just a moment, because if you are enjoying this journey into the medieval night, there is something simple you can do that genuinely helps. If you have not already, please tap the like button. It takes only a second, and it tells the algorithm that stories like this one are worth sharing with more people who love history. And if you are not yet subscribed to Walter Reconstructs History, consider subscribing right now so you never miss the next journey into the forgotten corners of the past. Thank you so much for being here. Now let us return to the medieval night, because we have only begun to uncover its secrets. We have spoken of where people slept, but what about the rituals that surrounded sleep, the customs and beliefs that shaped the act of going to bed? For medieval people, the transition from waking to sleeping was deeply woven with religion and superstition, because the night was not merely a time of physical danger, it was a time of spiritual danger as well. To the medieval mind, the world after dark belonged to forces beyond human control. Demons were thought to roam in the darkness. Evil spirits, the souls of the restless dead, and creatures of folklore were believed to grow bold once the sun had set. Sleep itself was a vulnerable state. When you closed your eyes and surrendered your consciousness, you were defenseless, your soul exposed to whatever malevolent forces might be lurking. And so, going to bed was never a casual act. It was surrounded by protective rituals. The most important of these was prayer. A devout medieval person ended the day on their knees, commending their soul to God before sleep, fully aware that they might not wake again. Death in the night was common, and people prayed as though each sleep might be their last. The bed itself was often blessed. People made the sign of the cross over their beds, sprinkled holy water, and placed religious objects nearby. A crucifix on the wall, a saint's image, holy relics if they could afford them. Some recited specific prayers meant to guard against the terrors of the night, asking for protection from nightmares, from demons, and from sudden death. There were many folk customs too. People might place iron objects near the bed, since iron was believed to ward off fairies and evil spirits. Herbs were hung or scattered to protect against both insects and malevolent forces. In some places, people were careful about the position of the bed, believing that the direction in which you slept could affect your safety and your fortune. The line between religion and folk magic was blurry, and ordinary people drew on both to feel safe as they surrendered to the dark. And then there were dreams, which held an extraordinary power over the medieval imagination. To a person in 1200, a dream was not simply the random firing of a sleeping brain. Dreams were meaningful. They could be messages from God, warnings of things to come, visitations from the dead, or temptations from the devil. The Bible was full of significant dreams, and medieval people took dreaming seriously as a window into the spiritual world. A vivid dream might be discussed for days, interpreted by a priest, or recorded if it seemed important enough. Nightmares were especially frightening, and they had a sinister explanation. The very word nightmare comes from the idea of the mare, a malevolent spirit or demon believed to sit upon the chest of a sleeper, pressing down upon them, stealing their breath, and filling their sleep with terror. The crushing sensation of a nightmare, what we now understand as sleep paralysis, was interpreted as a literal supernatural assault. To wake gasping in the dark, unable to move, was to have been visited by something evil. Is it any wonder that people prayed so fervently before closing their eyes? Now consider one particular group of medieval people whose entire lives were organized around a unique and demanding relationship with sleep: the monks and nuns who lived in monasteries and convents across Europe. Their nights were unlike anyone else's. In a monastery in the year 1200, sleep was not simply rest. It was structured around the divine office, the cycle of prayers that monks were required to perform throughout the day and night. The monastic day was divided into a series of services called the canonical hours, and crucially, this cycle continued through the night. Monks did not sleep through until morning. They would retire early, shortly after the evening prayers, and then rise in the dead of night, often around 2 in the morning, for the service known as matins or vigils. Summoned by a bell, they would shuffle from their beds in the darkness, make their way to the cold church, and chant psalms and prayers in the flickering candlelight while the rest of the world slept. After this nighttime office, they would return to bed for a second period of sleep before rising again at dawn for the next round of prayers. In a sense, the monastic life formalized and sanctified the segmented sleep that ordinary people practiced naturally. The monks turned the natural waking of the night into an act of worship, deliberately structuring their rest around their devotion to God. The conditions of monastic sleep were deliberately austere. Monks typically slept in a communal dormitory, a long hall lined with simple beds. The rules of many orders dictated that they sleep clothed, ready to rise at any moment for prayer. Their bedding was plain, their cells unheated, their comforts few. Sleep was something to be disciplined, not indulged. Too much sleep was considered a form of sloth, one of the deadly sins, a sign of a soul grown lazy and inattentive to God. The monastic ideal was vigilance, both spiritual and literal, a constant readiness of the soul. And so even in rest, the monk was meant to remain watchful. This brings us to a broader truth about how medieval people thought about sleep, not just spiritually but medically. The physicians and scholars of the age, drawing on ancient Greek and Roman medicine as well as Arabic learning, had elaborate theories about sleep and its role in health. Medieval medicine was dominated by the theory of the four humours, the idea that the body was governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that health depended on keeping these humours in balance. Sleep, according to this thinking, was essential for digestion and for restoring the body's balance. During sleep, it was believed, the body's natural heat turned inward to cook and process the food eaten during the day. This is why physicians warned against sleeping immediately after a heavy meal, or against sleeping too much or too little, each of which could disturb the delicate humoral balance. Medical texts of the period offer detailed advice on the proper way to sleep. Many physicians recommended sleeping first on the right side to aid digestion and then turning to the left later in the night. They advised against sleeping on one's back, which some believed could lead to nightmares or even more serious ailments. The position of the head mattered too. People were generally advised to sleep propped up, with the head and shoulders raised on bolsters and pillows, rather than lying completely flat. This is part of why medieval beds often appear short to modern eyes. People were not necessarily shorter, but they often slept in a semi-reclined, propped-up posture, rather than stretched out flat. The hours of sleep were also a matter of medical concern, with most authorities recommending that one sleep during the natural hours of darkness and rise with the light, in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Let us now think about the seasons, because in a world without artificial light or central heating, the experience of sleep changed dramatically throughout the year. The medieval year was a tale of two extremes. In the depths of winter, the nights were long, dark, and brutally cold. In the far north of Europe, darkness could stretch for 16 hours or more. People went to bed early simply because there was nothing else to do and no light to do it by. They bundled together for warmth, piled on every blanket and skin they owned, and slept long, extended nights. The first sleep and second sleep stretched out across the endless winter dark, with the waking interval in between offering a chance to stoke the fire against the cold. Winter sleep was a battle against the cold above all. In peasant homes, families huddled together, sharing body heat. Animals in the house added their warmth. People wore caps and even layers of clothing to bed. The wealthy drew their bed curtains tight and relied on furs and thick coverlets. But even in a castle, the stone walls radiated cold, and a chamber far from the fire could be bitterly chilly. Servants might warm a noble's bed with a warming pan, a covered metal container filled with hot coals passed between the sheets before the lord or lady retired. Summer brought the opposite challenge. The nights were short and warm, sometimes uncomfortably so. People stayed up later in the lingering daylight, working in the fields during the long hours of harvest, and slept for shorter stretches. The heat could make sleep restless, and the warm nights brought out swarms of insects, mosquitoes, fleas and flies that tormented sleepers. In the countryside, the rhythm of agricultural labor dictated everything. During the harvest, when every hour of daylight was precious, people sacrificed sleep to bring in the crops, working until they were utterly exhausted and then collapsing for a few short hours before rising again with the sun. This deep connection between sleep and the agricultural calendar reminds us of something important. For medieval people, sleep was never separate from the natural world. It bent and flexed with the length of the days, the temperature of the air, the demands of the land, and the turning of the seasons. There was no thermostat to hold the night at a constant temperature, no lamp to banish the dark, no schedule that ignored the sun. The medieval sleeper lived in intimate, unavoidable contact with the rhythms of nature, in a way that we, sealed in our climate-controlled, electrically lit bedrooms, have almost entirely lost. There is another dimension to medieval sleep that we should not overlook, and that is the near-total absence of privacy. In our modern world, we treat the bedroom as a private sanctuary, a personal space where we are alone with our thoughts or with one chosen partner. But this idea would have seemed strange, even unimaginable to most people in the year 1200. Sleeping was, for the overwhelming majority, a communal and social activity. We have already seen how peasant families shared a single room and often a single bed, how servants slept together in the great hall, and how monks slept in communal dormitories. But this sharing extended even further. It was completely normal for travelers to share a bed with strangers at an inn. If you stopped for the night at a roadside lodging, you might well find yourself climbing into a large bed alongside 2 or 3 other guests you had never met. This was not considered improper or unusual, it was simply how things were done. Beds were expensive, space was limited, and warmth was welcome. To sleep alone was in many ways a rare privilege or an unfortunate isolation rather than a desirable norm. This communal sleeping shaped social bonds in profound ways. To share a bed was to share trust, warmth, and protection. Friends shared beds. Siblings shared beds. Servants shared beds with one another. The night was a social space full of whispered conversations, shared dreams recounted in the dark, and the simple animal comfort of human closeness against the cold and the fear. In a strange way, the medieval night, for all its dangers and discomforts, may have been less lonely than the modern one. And what of the simple physical realities, the things we take for granted? Consider the absence of so much that we consider basic. There were no bathrooms attached to bedrooms. If you needed to relieve yourself in the night, you used a chamber pot, a simple vessel kept beneath or beside the bed to be emptied in the morning. In a castle, there might be a garderobe, a small latrine built into the thick wall, often just a cold stone seat over a long drop. There were no pillows as soft as ours, no mattresses as forgiving, no sheets as clean. Bedding was washed infrequently. The same straw might serve for a long time before being replaced. Smells, dampness, smoke, and the ever-present vermin were all part of the nightly experience. And yet, we must be careful not to imagine the medieval night as nothing but misery. Within all these hardships there was warmth, comfort, and meaning. There was the deep satisfaction of rest after a hard day's labor. There was the security of family gathered close. There was the gentle glow of the banked fire, the murmur of prayers, the comfort of routine and faith. For all that we might find their world harsh, medieval people found their own forms of peace in the night. Let us return for a moment to that fascinating pattern of segmented sleep, because it reveals something profound about how the very experience of being human has changed. That quiet hour in the middle of the night, between the first and second sleep, was in some ways a precious and unique part of medieval life. It was a time of stillness, of reflection, of intimacy and prayer, a sliver of the day that belonged entirely to the inner self. People emerged from their first sleep with their minds calm and their dreams fresh, and they used that hour to think, to pray, to love, and simply to be. Some historians and writers have suggested that the loss of this nighttime interval, swept away by artificial light, and the demand for consolidated, efficient sleep, represents a genuine loss for the human spirit. We have gained the ability to light up the night and bend it to our will, but in doing so, we may have lost a quiet, contemplative space that our ancestors took for granted. When we lie awake at 3 in the morning, anxious and frustrated, we are perhaps experiencing the ghost of a rhythm that was once entirely natural, now at war with the artificial schedules we have imposed upon ourselves. The great transformation came slowly over centuries. As cities grew, as artificial lighting improved, as street lamps spread, and the night became safer and more illuminated, people began to stay up later and to consolidate their sleep into a single block. The rhythms of industry, with its rigid hours and its factory whistles, demanded a different kind of sleeper, one who slept all at once and rose at a fixed time. The first sleep and the second sleep faded from memory, until by the modern age we had forgotten that humans ever slept any other way. The medieval night, with all its phases and rituals, slipped quietly into the past. So let us return one last time to the year 1200 and imagine the close of a single ordinary day. The sun sinks low over the fields, the church bell rings out across the village, calling the faithful to evening prayer. Smoke rises from 100 thatched roofs as families gather around their fires for a simple supper of bread and pottage. The curfew bell sounds, and one by one the lights of the village are extinguished. In the manor on the hill, the Lord retires to his curtained bed, while his servants bed down in the great hall below. In the monastery beyond the woods, the monks lie down in their austere dormitory, knowing they will rise in the deep of night to sing to God in the dark. Darkness settles over the land, complete and total, the kind of darkness we almost never see anymore. The stars wheel overhead in their thousands. A peasant family lies tangled together for warmth, the animals shifting in the corner, the fire banked to a faint red glow. They drift into their first sleep, the deep sleep of the exhausted and the faithful. And in a few hours they will wake into the quiet heart of the night, to pray, to talk, to wonder at their dreams, before sinking back down into their second sleep to await the dawn. For 800 years the world has transformed beyond all recognition. We have banished the darkness, conquered the cold, and reshaped the night to suit our will. And yet when we lie down to sleep, we are doing the same thing those medieval people did, surrendering ourselves to rest, to dreams, and to the mystery of the unconscious mind. The bed beneath you may be softer, the room around you warmer and brighter, but the act itself connects you to every human being who ever closed their eyes against the dark and trusted that morning would come. Tonight, when you fall asleep, somewhere deep within you stirs the same ancient rhythm that guided the medieval sleeper. And in that quiet moment between waking and dreaming, the year 1200 is not so very far away after all. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the medieval night. Before you go, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what you enjoyed most about this video. Was it the segmented sleep, the curtained beds of the nobility, the fears and prayers of the dark, or something else entirely? And just as importantly, tell me what you would like to see next here on Walter Reconstructs History. What forgotten corner of the past would you like us to bring back to life together? Your ideas genuinely shape the videos to come, so leave a comment and let me know. Until next time, sleep well, and remember, history is closer than you think.